incredibly unique experiences to offer that influence the arts and culture if they're engaged. And so I think moving forward, what the city needs is for people who love this place, understand this place, to continue to create institutions. I think we need more founders. I think Atlanta does entrepreneurs well, but we need like institution makers and institution builders and that kind of thing from people who are voices for what the city does well. Because people from outside it can't do that. And I don't think it's a reasonable expectation for us to, expect them to. And sure, they maybe can do better at consulting with local community and having some stakeholders involved in the choices they make. But ultimately, I don't know if our expectations are reasonable if we want someone who's outside of understanding the city well to suddenly provide things for the city or do things that are appropriate for our city or best serve our city and its community and its arts ecosystem. So we need to do it. And ADAMA is doing it. We've got incredible events like Articulate. We've got professional organizations like Black Women in Visual Arts. But we need so many more of those if we want to remain distinct in the arts and cultural context and grow, if we want to scale what we're doing. So that's what I think needs to happen now. The change that I've observed is people from outside kind of leading the ship. And I think now we need to, and that's, again, it's fine that they're here, I think. I think that's also an important part of a rich ecosystem, is to not be siloed and like in an echo chamber. But we now need to make sure that we're still in the conversation before it becomes something that isn't going to best serve Atlanta, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I just want to piggyback off of something that you were saying around this sort of like entrepreneurial spirit in Atlanta. Like I've heard a number of people over the years moan and complain about nothing in Atlanta lasts, right? Like that there's a constant turning over of things, which is actually an attribute that I think we need to embrace, right? Like the symbol of the city is a phoenix, like something that continues to reinvent itself, right? And that's always been something about Atlanta that's been inspiring to me, is that it's not static, right? It's a very dynamic place in that there are all of these people coming from other places, bringing ideas that worked in other cities and trying to apply them here, and then figuring out how to make it feel like Atlanta. And, it's so much creative energy and potential in that I think needs to be embraced more. But also I think it's imperative that we not lose sight or forget the institutions and the spaces and the artists and the creatives that came before, right? So like, for example, when I came to Atlanta, I knew I wanted to be an artist, but I didn't really even know what that meant at that time, you know what I mean? Like I just drew cartoons, right? And so it was, being in Atlanta and being on the campus of the Woodruff Art Center and going to the High Museum for the first time and, experiencing that, going from the Woodruff Art Center to the AUC, where I took classes with Dr. Arturo Lindsay, which transformed, the way that I saw myself, right? And, summers at the National Black Arts Festival, right? So it wasn't just, that Atlanta was trying to look like other places, while that was certainly a thing. Like people kept calling it the New York of the South or whatever. Now they're trying to call it the Hollywood of the South, right? But really Atlanta is Atlanta, and I think, those of us here who are creatives, who have the capacity to build and create, need to like keep that at the core. Like, what is Atlanta's voice? Like, what does Atlanta sound like? And I think, that's one of the goals of ADAMA, right, is to try to like capture that and reflect that back out. But, as an artist, I think it comes through in a lot of the work of artists who live and work here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with both of you. Just seeing all of the changes, just driving through Atlanta, sometimes I'm like, oh, wow, that street has been developed and there's condos, down the street. It just is changing so rapidly. So I just want to piggyback on what you both said, and I think it's very important for us to create these spaces and to have ownership over these spaces. I guess my next question to you is, I like to think of both of you as storytellers and, world builders, really. Where do you find some of your greatest inspirations to create these worlds and to sort of bring us along with you?
For me, a lot of what I attempt to do is to capture or re-articulate the things that we see or that we're told or that we're conditioned to believe, right? Which is another reason why I wholeheartedly agree with your point about building institutions, right? When we don't build our institutions, we're at the mercy of the people who do build those institutions, right? And then we have to ask permission to be ourselves. Then we have to be in the streets with a sign talking about Black Lives Matter, right? Rather than building our own spaces, creating our own spaces, telling our own stories, right? And so, that's kind of the not even kind of, but that is the goal of my work, is to tell our stories, to present us in a way that the world has often tried to mask or disguise or bury. Like, how do we, I think in some ways it causes me to like rub up against, the gatekeepers, in a certain kind of way, because I won't conform, and I can't. Like, even if I try to, I don't think that I could, and I think it's important for more of us to realize the potency that we have, the power that we have. And I think a lot of us oftentimes feel like, oh, well, in order for me to get by, I have to, take this red or blue pill. Well, I got to take a pill. Why can't I just do what I'm doing? And you know what I mean? I think ultimately, hopefully that you can see that in my work, but also see that in the way that I move and, try to give back to the community.
Yeah, I think conformity is valued, and if we are going to work for institutions that prize how well you follow instructions and prize how much you reinforce what the institution has always been, and call that a job well done, then we have to be realistic about how much change we think certain agents can actually have in those institutions. I'm seconding what you said, Fahamu. It's difficult when you are a person who is a natural innovator. You don't really have a choice in the matter. And so you present ideas because you think about things and you conceptualize things perhaps just differently from other people. And that can be a huge asset if you know how to manage it well. But I think, unfortunately, very often people do not know how to manage personalities like that well. And so there starts to be this tension, even though you could turn that person's, set of maybe perhaps a unique set of assumptions that they have about the world, their ways of looking at things that are different, the backgrounds that they're coming from that provide these new interpretations of old ideas, and enrich them and come to the table and try to figure out, shake down where the overlap is that would be an asset to the community you're serving. That's ideal, but it doesn't happen very often. Usually what happens is that people they just double down and they try to make those people conform. As if, again, because it bears repeating, as if they can, as if it's that simple for them. And so that's another sort of point to the comment I made about institution building. It's also just, I think, difficult to spend a lot of energy trying to change old ways, and perhaps not the best use of your energy. And instead, folks who have really brilliant ideas, which I believe my community has tons of really thoughtful people who have incredibly creative ideas, I think they should maybe stop and consider if they have goals to work for institutions that already exist or things that already exist. Maybe they should stop and think about if that's what they really want to do, or if that's just what they've been acculturated to think they're supposed to do, and instead spend all of that labor and energy building something, even if that thing is very small at first. Because I think our future depends upon it. Our arts ecosystem future, but also just our future in general. We need to be the authors of the things that we want to see, instead of, again, to repeat what Fahamu had said, sort of begging or asking or pleading or arguing for our validity and our voice in these spaces. Maybe we should remove ourselves from the spaces. Maybe we should not centralize sort of European sets of values and institutions, and think about new modalities and new ways and new approaches, and act on those and see what happens. And again, that's happening slowly, and I think if we can, I'm essentially making a call to action. If we can do that more, I think we're going to see this really transformative thing happen in the city, because the talent is here already. We just have to believe that we have it and then apply it, and believe that we do not need to convince, because we already have an audience that knows this, right? That knows our lives matter. So who are we talking to?
Right. And who are we talking to, and why does their opinion matter in the first place? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like Toni Morrison said, invisible to whom, We're here, we're creating work, we're doing the work, and so I think we should be at the forefront of this arts movement that we have here, and that's been cultivated throughout the years. We've talked a lot about community, and I'd like to think that in both of your work, it's very community-driven, and you serve community in both of your work. Can you talk a little bit about where that stems from?
Yeah, I mean, I think for one, it's an innate African value, right? Like, this idea of individualism is a very European, Western kind of construct. This kind of thing of I did it, my own like research and study around like African philosophy and spirituality, like everything speaks to the group movement, which is why, so much of ADAMA is around, we are a village. One of our guiding principles is the South African concept of Ubuntu. I am because of others, right? Like, none of us are going to get there by ourselves, right? Even my practice and my studio practice is a collaborative process. I'm working with other people, to help me realize, ideas and things that I have. And so, my way of moving in the world has always sort of centered on community. And that's another thing that I think, another value that I learned from working with Arturo, who, took me under his wing and introduced me to his community, and seeing how he has built networks around the world, with artists and other scholars, and the ways in which that contributes to his ability to give back to his students and others, you know what I mean? And so, I think this idea of individualism can be dangerous, because when you isolate yourself, then you don't have those resources that can help you through or help you navigate, some of the challenges that will inevitably surface, right? So, building a good team, building a good network around you. I think there's even a expression that says you can tell a lot about a person by looking at their circle of friends. Their 5 best friends tells you a lot about that person, right? Like, we are communal beings, yeah.
Where did my community? So I'm going to answer this question picking up on 2 aspects of my own personal life and the making of who I came to be as a person. One is I feel a very strong sense of social responsibility to the 1 billion plus diasporan people, because simply that's how I was raised. And Fahamu and I have talked about this a lot. We were both raised by Pan-Africanists. And so, I almost want to use the language, and I mean it in a very good way, even though it normally is used, perhaps more accurately used in a negative context. I was brainwashed. Completely. My parents.
Conditioned.
Let's do that one. But no, like it's, and I'm thankful for, because I realize that I have a certain base level of confidence and sense of belonging that maybe other people have to work up to as they come of age, and I had it from the time I was born. In fact, I remember having experiences, sidebar, with you know, going to like black schools and with black American students and them being like, "Ooh, you black," and me being like, "Thank you," and then like reading their face and being like, "Oh, they meant that as an insult," like, so that's how I was raised. I was raised by people who taught me to love, protect, respect, cherish, contribute, invest in a global community of people of African descent. And so I can't do anything I've ever done in my life, you know, from now I happen to be a curator, but all the other careers I've had have always had this element of like, how am I contributing to my community? That's how I make value. That's how I know that something's important, is because I've done a good job, is if I can really easily access how I've been able to like push a needle forward on something and help my people in some way, or meaningfully engage them, not even help. Like, they don't always need to be saved. Contribute is more accurate. So that's one. It's just how I came to be a person. And then secondly, I spent a bit of time thinking that I might be able to, this actually, this kind of shadows some of the things we were talking about earlier. I thought that I might be able to go into institutions, and certainly some people do this, and I'm glad they do, in the political arena. So working with like multilateral organizations or state departments who are working on initiatives in Africa and like affect change there. And while I was paying dues to get those kinds of very competitive jobs, I worked for some NGOs and some policy think tanks and things like that. And that work taught me, because of the organizations I happen to work for, certainly not all policy think tanks and NGOs do this, but the ones I happen to work for did this really incredible sort of ground laying before they executed any project, which was to go into communities and ask. Like, it's a simple thing, but people don't do that. You know, they're just like in these Jeeps, like pummeling through places like Africa and like doing aid work, and like nobody asked them to be there. And there's no community buy-in. There's no real responding to a quote unquote problem, because the people that define what the problem is, turns out, are not them, right? Because all those things are culturally informed and socially informed, et cetera. So the places that I worked for, we would spend sometimes months in these communities, first of all, becoming a part of the community and getting to know people, but meeting with community stakeholders that already exist, understanding and going into these communities with the sort of mentality that there are already assets in the community, instead of thinking that we are coming there to give you the assets. We were coming there knowing there were assets, and then we were very clear about our actual function was that we had the privilege to be a liaison for what the community is saying it needs and wants to be its best self, and the funding opportunities, and we were just that conduit, really. And so it was this process of meeting with people, listening to people, listening, and then you put together a proposal to a large funding body about what project needs to happen in this rural community, because you actually are you're actually, you know, armed with their own voices, as opposed to, you know, whatever assumptions I would have with my Western, because I have them too, right? I grew up here, with my Western and American biases about the problems I think I see in that community, which is faster, but it's not impactful, and it's not sustainable, and it doesn't actually help people. You know, if I, for example, to be specific, if I saw something like, oh, you know, I think, you know, upper respiratory issues seem to be a problem here. Maybe we should find a new way to like burn fires. And I just go ahead and I go on that tangent and I create some kind of proposal for it, and I get funding for it, and we start bringing in supplies to burn cleaner fires. But the women in the community do not care about that and really, really wanted water, more accessible water, and wanted to think through ways to, you know, harvest water throughout the year and, you know, retain water from the rainy season that would normally just run off. And then they have all these, you know, anecdotes and personal stories about like why that would transform their lives in ways that I would never know, because I don't live there. I'm not among these people. I don't have to function in this community. So yeah, if you say that you are going in a community to have an impact, you need to talk to the community. And so that experience now as a curator is still how I approach work. I never assume, no matter how much I've read or studied or researched or whatever, that that what I first think to present, if I'm telling the narrative of a people I do not belong to, is actually accurate. I do involve community stakeholders. I ask permission. I listen. I put together charrettes of a few people sometimes, and say that are very close to the content, and say, what do you think is the most important story to tell? And like we kind of whiteboard it out. And I don't feel like I need to own this project or exhibition or story in that way. It's still mine because I'm the person that's articulating it and filtering all of the information I'm getting to tell a story. But without their participation, I risk being inaccurate and I risk being culturally insensitive. And I would always try to avoid both. So that's how community plays into my life in a very sort of my lived experience, but also how I execute curation.
Yeah, that's really powerful. We're dropping some gems today, like you said, it seems like a very simple thing to go in and ask and, what do you need? But it's very poignant and a lot of people don't do that. And so I think that is exactly how, we grow this art ecosystem here.
Or even humble yourself. Like, did I do this right? This is how I understood this.
Right.
Why risk offending someone when all you have to do is ask a question?
Absolutely, yeah. And to your point of just, both of your points of leaning on your community, capitalism sort of drives off of us being individualistic and wearing ourselves down. And so thinking about community and being in community, that's something that I'm always, trying to remind myself because, my mom was a single mother and, we kind of isolated ourselves through, just living within this system. But there's a lot of help out there, there's a lot of community, and it's really important to be able to lean on your community. I guess my next question for you is, Atlanta has been coined the Black Mecca, we've all heard it. And it's also a cultural hub. I would like to ask, in what ways do you think that influences our contemporary art space?
As I'm pondering my response, I'm also wondering why I'm always the first to have to respond to the questions.
I feel like I just talked a lot.
No, I think it kind of goes back to an earlier point that we were making around, just the proximity that we have to one another as Black people in our diversity, right? Like it becomes it becomes an almost undeniable creative energy that challenges us and makes us want to create. I think this notion of Atlanta being this Black cultural mecca, it's interesting. We feel it, right? It's a thing that you feel, you sense it, but part of the reason for the impetus for ADAMA was, where is it? Where do you go for it, right? How do I know where the Black culture and the Black, things are? And because I've had a lot of people, friends who are, Black, who come visit Atlanta and they're like, nah, it was whack. And I was like, you just didn't know where to go, right? You didn't have the right people showing you around. I was in Lawrenceville. You were not in Atlanta. And so, but I do think, from a creative perspective, though, without having statistics or data to cite, because it's been this nucleus of Black intellectual power, of Black political power, it can't help but also be a space of Black creative power. Long before hip hop was the big giant stomping through the streets, you know what I mean? You had, the funk music movement, you know what I mean? You had jazz, you had, gospel, you had all of these creative artistic movements. You had, again, the history of the National Black Arts Festival and the way that activated the city. Prior to that, you had the Atlanta Life art shows. This was like one of the few places in the country where black artists could share their work. Right, we have institutions here really right now with really dynamic and dope collections of black art that most of us don't even know about. Most of us have never even seen. And again, I think the thing that we are circling and ultimately trying to land on is an institution where you can get that 24/7, right? That's living, vibrant. We have so many black institutional spaces here that are dedicated to like civil rights, and there's no dismissal of the importance of that, but that's not all our story is, right? And I think it's imperative that we create and have spaces where you can see the living, breathing, active, evolving, changing, challenging, complicated narrative of Blackness, and that's where ADAMA hopes to be.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that.
When I hear Black Mecca, I always think about, how in the earliest days, after slavery, we've got these universities popping up here and this concentration of institutions for higher learning at a time where to this day, most Americans don't have a college degree, but certainly people of color in this time were not, getting these degrees. And then suddenly you have a city that has this high concentration of schools where people are coming not only from the South, but from all these sort of disparate parts of the country and in fact the world to come and learn, and how that transforms everything, in my opinion. That's kind of where I always go back and put it. And some of those people become civil rights leaders, but some of those people become artists, and some of those people become linguists, and some of those people become brilliant scholars and mathematicians, and a lot of them, which is true in the case of many university cities, don't leave. And then they're here and they reinvest in this ecosystem. And so we've had several generations of that now. And I think that is in no small part why Atlanta is Atlanta. And then once the ball gets rolling, it's a safe space and it's a beacon. And so, now I like to encourage people whenever the Black Mecca terms comes up to remember that this is also one of the largest foreign-born Black communities in the country. And I think the ones that have us beat are all in the Northeast. So we are like the capital of foreign-born Black people in the South. And so Black Mecca means beyond the Black American experience at this point. They're here. They don't always have the same visibility. And so we need to be intentional about making sure that they're included and that we're thoughtful about this robust, brilliant Caribbean and West African in particular communities that are here in Atlanta and have been for now like 30 years in a prominent way. So I think we're constantly evolving what it means to be Southern, what it means to be Atlanta, what it means to be Black.
I just wanted to add one more thing. We're in this neighborhood, Pittsburgh, right, which is one of the first Black communities in the city. Literally, this campus, this Pittsburgh Yards campus, was the farmland that students from Clark College, which is right across over here, which is now Carver High School, but that's the original campus of Clark College, right? Like, yeah, we're literally sitting, in Black history, and it's, and again, I think there's so much about the history of the city and the impact of Black people on the city that gets constantly sort of buried and erased, but requires our active work to mine it, right, and to find ways to put it back out into public and make sure that people are aware.
Yeah, absolutely. We're literally sitting, right now, right here in history, and creating history through ADAMA and through your work at the High and just the work that you're doing. I'd just like to thank you both for sharing so much today. We're getting to the end of our program, but I'd like to open it up to the audience to see if there's any questions you have.
And I really appreciate the kind of last note that you were that you ended the conversation on. I'm a Nigerian American person who grew up here in Atlanta, and so it's great to hear you speak about kind of that part of the Black diaspora here. My question is around institution building, and I'm thinking about your work, Lauren, at the High and ADAMA, and wondering, what are your thoughts on what new institutions for African diasporic art in Atlanta could do that places like the High and even Black-owned galleries in Atlanta may not be doing? Maybe they're trying to do these things, but what do you think new institutions specifically could offer? And then Fahamu, I would love to hear your thoughts on really your hopes and dreams for how you want to institutionalize African diaspora art through ADAMA in the future.
You want to go first?
No. I work for an institution that is not mine. I think institution building is...
I'm learning institution building. But I would say one of the first things I think that needs to happen or would potentially be beneficial for institutions that are serving more diverse communities is, again, realizing their potential and their power, right? And not asking for permission to be, right? I think, again, there's so much sort of positioning and posturing, like, we need this person or we need this organization to believe in us and to support us in order to validate us. But I think we validate ourselves by showing up, right? And by having the confidence and the courage to create something where nothing exists, which is really the role of an artist. Like, to be an artist, you got to be delusional. You got to believe that blank canvas, that there's something on that blank canvas that the world needs to see, and only you see it, and you gotta make everybody else see it, right? And I think, when it comes to like building an institution, I'm realizing that it works the same. We've been at this for 5 years. And I mean, in 5 years, I think we've accomplished a lot, but there's so much more, that we want to be able to do and that, we have vision for and ideas for. But sometimes it requires actually being able to show people something before they will actually want to invest in it or be able to, conceive of it, right? And so, we're grateful, now that we have space here at Pittsburgh Yards that we can present our programming, that, it will take us even further in terms of making an impression on the community to come out. Like, for example, this is the largest audience that we've had for Arts Salon, right? And so we're, yes, clap that up, yeah. And so we're hoping when we do our event, our next live event next month, that we'll have twice as many people, right? But, again, it is one of those things where it requires us to realize our power and our potential and stop asking for permission to be, yeah.
And I will add something that I think applies in both the work that I do and in institution building, because there's a lot of the same stuff happening in terms of trying to build an audience, educate people, find funding. I do all those things. I think what's really helpful for me is to constantly think about the opportunities. What's not happening? What audiences are not being accessed? What artists are not being looked at? And what geographies in the world, and what funding sources are people not thinking about because they're all trying to compete for the same couple of sources that are known? Who are these quiet collectors that have these massive collections of like incredible, important art, but they aren't necessarily engaging with the museum? When you start to think about what's not there instead of looking at what is there, you will find so much. You'll find so much. And again, that goes for the actual content, that goes for the funding sources, that goes for everything. So looking for opportunities, what's not being said, what don't we know, which is also kind of a creative process of like imagining delusion and then working to manifest the thing. But that has worked really well for me, because then you have your own lane, your own point of distinction, your own contact, your own funding source nobody else has, your own artist community that you discovered. I had this incredible experience last year of like discovering an incredible arts community in Kinshasa that I don't think other Americans have access to, but I went. I got on a plane and I went, and I had a hunch and I went and followed it. I think doing that as opposed to jumping on the bandwagon of what's already becoming very popular in contemporary African art, for example, are really great opportunities for you to shine and do something unique and contribute meaningfully to the arts ecosystem and avoid redundancies, which we all benefit from. We want to be enriched. We don't want a whole bunch of the same thing, right? And yet we approach things the same way. Well, if we do that, we are going to get the same thing. So that's my advice.
I just want to like build on something else that you said earlier too, in regard to like how we activate the African diaspora, because we were very intentional about that in our name, right? Like we didn't call ourselves an African American museum. We're an African Diaspora Museum because we recognize that what we consider and what we account for as Black culture in Atlanta is made up of a variety of Black experiences, right? Like Blackness, even though, it's kind of, everybody thinks Black is one thing, Black is not monolithic, right? Like it's all of these different experiences and expressions and flavors and sounds and tastes and colors and, all these different things. And so, our goal is to highlight the diversity of the Black experience, not only here in Atlanta, but in this region and in this world. And another reason that I, sort of landed on this idea was because in my travels around the world, no matter what city or country I was in, I would find myself sitting at a dining room table with a bunch of beers and a bunch of people who look like me having the same conversation about our frustrations with being creatives and trying to get our voices out and be seen in the world as our actual selves and not other people's ideas of who we are, right? And so ultimately, that's what ADAMA aspires to be, is that place again where we can see ourselves and be ourselves.
Well, first of all, thanks for the shout out. I appreciate it. You do honor me. That's just for right now.
I'm working on getting in the wheel. That's just
You got a lot of way, you got miles to go. But anyway, the Wolof have a very good expression that I think applies to here. It says, know who you are before someone tells you. And that's what I've heard in your voices, as you're going on. So I'm glad to see, you're moving along the same lines. There's another, thing that we need to take a look at, when we talk about the African diaspora, is to try not to be imperialistic, and that the U.S. American, and you take a look at that word American, referring to the United States. I mean, my God, we're talking about continent. That's like South Africans calling themselves the only Africans, But let me not go on a tangent, which I'm famous for. Anyway, the important thing is that that we don't overwhelm other communities, But I'm glad to see what you're doing, with ADAMA. Like I said, you make me very, very proud. And these conversations like this, become important, and you get other voices also, from other communities. So that's one of the things I want to say. And the last piece on this also is that we are very tribal, and, culture is dynamic. I'm just sort of laying these different things out, that becomes the stuff that we have to happen. And because it's dynamic, it's ever changing. You meet a Cubano, and you hang out with a Cubano becomes your good friend, et cetera. There's stuff that you're going to be picking up from that. Pretty soon, you go to New York, after a while, you start talking Spanglish, It's very proper language, by the way. So anyway, I'm glad to see what you're doing, and Laura, the same to you. I just came back. I was at the High last week. I was walking through and looking at the ways that the work was being displayed. And my niece, by the way, had flew in from Panama, and I took her to the High, and walk her through. So
Thank you.
Let me stop on that point. I just want to lay some things out, and continue. To do this, because it's all about getting those conversations going. It ain't about solving a problem, because 5 years from now, 50 years from now, a bunch of people are going to be sitting around the same damn table, same kind of beer, and talking about, damn, man, Anyway, I'll stop on there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this talk. I really enjoyed it. I'm the mother of two teenage boys. One's with me. He's a budding artist. And when I was growing up, my parents told me there was no money in art. And I'm trying to buck that trend with my children because they're interested in digital arts and culinary arts and theater arts and all these things. So what are some good resources or spaces or places that are safe that I can take them to explore art, practice art, and figure out where they want to go next? Because I don't want to be my parents and tell them that they can't make a profession and a career and a life out of art.
Luckily, you live in Atlanta.
Right.
So the AUC museums are incredible, and there's so many Black-owned galleries here. We can roll them all out for you. If we want to do a roll call, we can. But we can also just talk to you afterwards. But I would just go to the events, not just to see what they produced, but because it's a gathering space. People will be there. Introductions will be made. You'll meet, all kinds of other people, and then those people will introduce you to more people. And that's actually another wonderful thing about Atlanta. People are accessible here. And so, yeah, I think just start going to some of the events, get on the listservs so that you get the emails. But there are probably, I would say, around 10 great art spaces in the city. And because, again, you are in Atlanta, half of those are engaged in Black spaces like the AU Center, or there are Black-owned galleries that program a lot of Black art or African diasporan art. So I would go out and see it and meet folks.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I heard those same things growing up. That there was no money in art. I was just crazy enough not to care. But one of the things that I think is important, especially as we trouble and challenge and push against like convention, is to try to practice like dissociating the value of what art does from money. One of the greatest experiences I ever had around art is in being social, with art was, coming up in Yin Yang Cafe in the late 90s. And this was a spot where it was just artists of all stripes, musicians, singers, dancers, painters, poets, you name it. Everybody was hanging out there. Nobody was making a dime. But we were creating some of the most amazing art. And, and I realized that art is social, right? Like it's necessary, it's urgent, we need it, right? And the value of it far supersedes anything you can make from it. Yeah, we gotta make a living, we gotta pay our bills and all that kind of stuff like that. But art is so much more than that. And so my advice would just be to, get out, like Lauren said, to as many art experiences as you can, meet people, meet artists. There's great artists sitting in this room right now, just talk to people, and ultimately, I think when you are true to yourself, when you're authentic in what you're creating, the money will come, But, if the goal is to, like, I'm getting this to make $1 million, you about to be broke.
But if the goal is I have something authentic to say and I want to share it and this is meaningful to me, that's where you get rich. Spiritually, emotionally, and financially.
We're good? Any other questions? All right. I'm going to give this mic back to you. You want to close this up? I can, but I'll let you close first.
Yeah, I just want to thank you all for being here, for sharing this space. I want to congratulate you both on the work that you're doing, you being the first Black in-house curator at the High Museum. That's huge. So congratulations and thank you for the work that you're doing.
Please play that again and say it loud.
Yes, the first Black curator at the High Museum of Art. Yes, absolutely. And for you as well, your amazing career, and just also for creating ADAMA. I remember I went to your Creators Mornings talk years ago, and you planted the seed, and you said that you wanted to create ADAMA, and we're here now, and so this is a really full circle moment. So I just want to thank you both for everything that you're sharing and giving to the Atlanta community and just the diaspora abroad. So I want to say thank you for that.
Thank you.
love it. This was great. Maybe you know this or you don't know it, but a lot of you all's questions, thoughts, and a lot of this conversation is like, why we exist. So thank you for those moments. Some closing thoughts for you. We have t-shirts and merch for sale, okay? So we've got some original, like, I'm gonna call them OG ADAMA shirts and long sleeves out there. Martina's actually wearing one. And then we also have the latest. We also have our latest collaboration with Atlanta Influences Everything. So AIE partnered with us to create some one-of-a-kind custom merch, really combining our style with theirs. So please, when you come out, take a look, grab a piece for yourself, for a friend. All of these things go back to supporting ADAMA. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, so thank you for that. And then the last thing I'll note is our lovely volunteer videographer, if you raise your hand. There you go. She's going to be at the front near the door, and if you all just have a minute, it would be really, really, really impactful if you can share a video note about, just say your name, what ADAMA means to you, what the diaspora means to you, something of that nature. She's got the prompts for you, but if you can spare 2 minutes, that would really support us with our case for support as we, hit these streets and try to get people to understand the vision of what we're trying to do. So thank you so much.